We're here in New York City where OnePlus has just had its first live launch event, and it's for this, the OnePlus 5T. We just got done spending some time with the 5T, so let's go take a look. So this is the OnePlus 5T. It's the second time that the company has done a mid-cycle refresh of its flagship, the same as the OnePlus 3 to the 3T. Except for the calculation is different this time around. With the 5T, it actually changes the external hardware a bit and leaves the internals the exact same as the OnePlus 5. So that means that we're looking at the same platform, the Snapdragon 835, 6 or 8 gigs of RAM, 64 or 128 gigs of storage, 3300 milliamp hour with the Dash Charge charging system, and of course the main features of things like the headphone jack, alert slider, dual cameras. But you do notice right off the top when you look at the front that this screen has changed. It's a 6-inch 2:1 aspect ratio. It's still 1080p, so it's 2160 by 1080 because it's taller rather than the 1920 by 1080 of the OnePlus 5. And it's basically the same Optic AMOLED panel. So you're looking at the same kind of mid to high range quality, but not the absolute top end like from a Samsung phone. So it's the aspect ratio has changed and it's made the phone a little bit taller, but not that much taller actually, even though you're getting this extra screen real estate, because you'll notice that the bezels have shrunk on the top, but especially on the bottom. It's the smaller of the two bezels, and you notice that that means no more fingerprint sensor, no more capacitive key options. So if you're one of those people that love the capacitive keys, the OnePlus 5 was the end of the road. You have on-screen navigation only. And of course, losing the fingerprint sensor there means that you switched over to the rear fingerprint sensor. Same kind of style, one-touch, ceramic-covered fingerprint sensor, and it means now when it's on the back, it's a little easier to reach pulling it out of your pocket, and it also means that you can swipe down to get the notifications, all that kind of good stuff. You'll notice on the back here that the dual cameras stick out a bit more. When you take this phone and you kind of stretch it out to put in that bigger 6-inch display, it brought everything down a little bit and the camera pod sticks out. Just a little bit of a visual flair, and you can tell that you have the new version with these changes on the back. The secondary camera is the only thing that's changed in the OnePlus 5T. It's a 20 megapixel unit with 1 micron pixels compared to the 16 megapixel main sensor that remains completely unchanged from the OnePlus 5. And the interesting thing is it's no longer behind a telephoto lens, it's behind the same focal length as the main camera. So why would you have two sensors with the same focal length? Well, it's for low light. Interestingly, even though it has smaller micron pixels than the main camera, it's tuned for low light. So when the camera notices that you're in a low light situation, it switches to that one. It doesn't use both at the same time like we've seen with some phones that use a monochrome sensor. We're gonna have to test that a whole lot more to see how it works out. But the interesting thing is that it keeps portrait mode, which is nice, and that can be tuned up in software, and hopefully OnePlus has improved that. What it hasn't improved is there's still no OIS on these lenses, so EIS only, and that's going to make that second lens for low light really interesting because lacking the OIS was kind of a downside on the OnePlus 5. But you'll notice when I pull the OnePlus 5 in here that it's very, very similar, especially when you're talking about in this midnight black color. Very similar build, similar soft touch kind of finish with just a little bit of texture to it. But when you lay them side by side, the height is barely noticeable. The power button is in the exact same spot. That awesome alert slider also in the same spot, and the volume rocker too. I mean, even the layout on the bottom with that headphone jack and your USB-C and your single speaker, it's all the same. Really, the only differentiator is that front view, which is, of course, important. It feels a bit more modern to have the 5T with these smaller bezels like that. The OnePlus 5T comes with Android 7.1 Nougat on board, which is very interesting for a phone at the end of 2017. But OnePlus is going to be rolling out Oreo to the 5T and all the way back to the OnePlus 3 by the end of the year. And the software experience is going to be basically unchanged between all four of those models. The one differentiator that's going to stand out at the OnePlus 5T is Face Unlock. So this phone has the same front-facing camera hardware as the OnePlus 5, but it provides you with an extremely fast unlocking system. Now, the reason why it's that fast is that this isn't Apple Face ID, all right? It's not taking in tens of thousands of facial points. It's just using a front-facing camera to identify about 100 different focal points on your face, so it knows how far apart your eyes are, it knows where your main features are. Now you can turn it off, of course, because this is not nearly as secure as that fingerprint sensor on the back or even a pattern or a pin, and you can also choose to only start it as soon as you swipe on the lock screen. So if you want to be able to actually interact with the lock screen, as most of us do because the notifications are so easy to manage from the lock screen, you can do that as well. But to see something happen this fast, that you're on the lock screen and you just tilt it up and you've unlocked, is going to be a big differentiator for a lot of people. Now, not going to be worth upgrading from the 5 to the 5T just to get that, but it's a cool feature that we haven't seen implemented that well on that many phones. Now, the more interesting comparison, I think, is going from the 3T to the 5T, because this is the year-on successor. If you were somebody that waited past the OnePlus 3 and got the 3T, you may be considering this jump up to the 5T. Now, the hardware makes a considerable jump in terms of just looks. It looks and feels a bit more modern. I will say that the quality honestly hasn't really jumped up much. That's more of a testament to the fact that the 3T was a really solid phone at the time, and it feels like the 5T is just kind of a progression of that design. It's rounded off more, of course, is smoothed out, kind of more like a little bit of a pebble rather than this blocky slab of aluminum in the 3T. But that's where you also notice the spec upgrade. So going up to the Snapdragon 835, the option of 8 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of storage makes a big difference coming from the 3T, and I think a lot of people are going to be making that jump. The only question with the 5T is, on its own, no matter what you're upgrading from, it's taken another price jump. So you're up to $499 for the OnePlus 5T, and it still doesn't include some nice to have features like your dual speakers or your waterproofing. It still is that value-based flagship where you take a couple of corners, cut here and there, but you get the absolute top-end specs. And even though it remains unchanged from the OnePlus 5, the 5T still has excellent specs for the end of 2017. We're gonna have to see how things work out over time in our review, of course, in terms of battery life, how this screen works out, has the tuning changed, but the important part for a lot of people is going to be how those dual cameras work out, because that was one of the shortcomings of OnePlus phones, and including the OnePlus 5, in can these dual cameras stand up with the rest of the competition that rightfully should be better, being $300 or $400 more. But if you want to try and play in that flagship space, those cameras and all of those little things have to be great as well. We're going to see how that works out in our full review of the OnePlus 5T, but for now, there's your early look at the phone.